rancher lived alone for years, until the Bigfoot laid a sleeping woman in his bed. Out on the frozen plains, a lone rancher found tracks too big for any man. His cabin stood as the only light against the storm when something left behind a token from the past. In the shadows of the pines, a giant figure breathed heavy, watching, yet made no move to strike. And then out of the storm it laid a sleeping woman upon his bed, fragile, silent, holding a silver ring. The rancher's hands trembled, but instead of pulling the trigger, he lowered his gun, whispering, "Not every shadow harms." The creature turned, fading into the mist, leaving the rancher with a life he never expected. Because sometimes legends don't haunt. Sometimes they heal. In the cold, lonesome West, sometimes the darkness brings back a life. At the far end of a snow-covered valley, a small wooden cabin stood alone like a shadow forgotten by time. The man who lived there, a solitary rancher, had not heard another person's laughter for many years. His days repeated like the turning wheels of a wagon along an old trail, rising at dawn to split firewood, checking the fences, feeding the horses and the cattle, then returning at night to sit quietly before the fire. His only companions were a loyal old dog and a brown horse that breathed steam into the freezing night. Winters in the West were harsh. Winds whipped down from the mountains like lashes of steel. Snow fell heavy, covering the cabin roof in white, making the world around the rancher even more silent. Some nights, he would sit by the window staring out at the black sky that swallowed every trace of light. Loneliness wore at his heart, yet also hardened it, until he lived quietly, almost as if he were part of the wilderness itself. But one stormy night, as the wind howled through the cracks in the cabin walls and the pines outside snapped and groaned, the rancher heard a sound unlike any other. It was not the cry of a lost deer, nor the step of a hunter. It was heavy, slow, as if something enormous was moving out there. The old dog pricked its ears, growling low. The rancher placed his hand gently on the stock of his rifle and opened the door a crack. A rush of icy wind swept into the room. Under the dim moonlight, veiled by mist, he saw strange marks. In the deep snow, there lay tracks, huge, far larger than any man's foot. Each one pressed down hard, carved into the earth, as though a giant being had just passed through. The rancher knelt, his rough, calloused hand trembling as he touched the print, the cold seeping into his skin. His chest tightened, his eyes widened, caught between wonder and fear. No human could have left such footprints. He stood frozen for a long while, listening to the wind, to his own breath. The whole forest seemed to hold its breath with him. In that moment, the rancher knew his quiet, lonely life was about to change. For something beyond human understanding had come to find him. Part 1. Footprints in the Snow. That winter came earlier than usual. From the very start of November, the western sky had turned the color of dull, lead-heavy clouds, pressing down on the wide plains. The first flakes of snow fell as the rancher was splitting wood on his porch. He lifted his head quietly, watching the tiny crystals spin in the wind, landing on the worn leather of his old coat. A brief smile crossed his face, but it faded just as quickly, like a streak of light swallowed by the night. Winter had arrived, bringing with it long months of cold and loneliness where silence was thicker than the smoke inside the cabin. Each day, the rancher carried on with his routine, tending to his small herd. His loyal brown horse was fed first, then the milk cows, then the sheep. The soft jingle of the horse's bell and the clouds of breath in the dim morning air were the only sounds around him. His boots pressed deep into the snow, leaving tracks alongside the prints of wild creatures. Wolves and bears were no strangers to him. He had faced them many times before, and experience kept him always cautious. But that morning, something was different. He was leading his horse toward the hay when the old dog suddenly let out a long, mournful howl. Its fur stood on end-eyes, fixed on the edge of the forest. The rancher froze his hand, instinctively tightening around the grip of the rifle at his side. This was no howl for rabbits or foxes. It was the sound a dog made only when it sensed something strange, something far too large. Slowly, the rancher followed the dog's gaze, his eyes scanning the fresh snow. And then he saw them. Footprints. Enormous footprints. They stretched in a line pressed deep into the frozen ground, as if something weighing hundreds of pounds had walked there. Each track was nearly 3 times the size of a grown man's boot. Their shape was strange, not the claw of a beast, not the mark of a hunter's shoe. The rancher knelt, his gloved hand brushing the edge of one print. His fingers trembled as the cold bit into his skin, sending a shiver through him. And in that moment, memories stirred echoes of nights long ago sitting by a town fire when the elders told stories of the giant of the forest. A shadow that walked the snows tall and silent, leaving behind marks no man dared follow. Children would shiver and cling to their mothers. Grown men would laugh it off as a tale meant to scare, and the rancher back then had only smirked. But now beneath his hand, this print was real, cold, immense. He stood frozen, his breath rising like smoke into the air. The wind rushed through the pines, carrying a long, haunting sound like a distant call from another world. The old dog growled low but dared not move closer. The horse stomped nervously, its eyes wide with fear. The rancher drew a deep breath, steadying himself. His eyes followed the line of tracks. They came from the forest, circled the corral, then disappeared toward the mountainside. No blood, no signs of a hunt, only passing through. But why linger so near the cabin? The thought chilled him more than the snow. That night, he sat by the fire, listening to the crackle of burning wood. On the table lay his father's old rifle, polished and ready. The flames flickered across his weathered face, shadows etched deep with doubt. Could it have been a prank? But who could create such massive tracks? A bear, perhaps. Yet he had hunted bears before, and never once had he seen prints so large, so strangely human. The firelight flickered in his tired eyes, revealing a heart torn between disbelief and unease. The rancher was not one to believe in legends, yet his pulse beat faster than it should. Deep inside, he knew this was no ordinary thing. The next day, he followed what traces the snow had not yet swallowed. Fresh flakes covered much, but the deeper impression still showed beneath the white. Step by step, he moved slowly, each boot heavy, his hand never far from the rifle. The stillness was so complete he could hear the snow crunch beneath his feet. Then he stopped. Before him rose a line of towering pines cloaked in drifting mist. And there within the white distance stood a dark, massive figure, motionless. The rancher held his breath. His hand clenched the rifle until it went numb. Yet in his heart, he knew he had crossed the threshold of something beyond human understanding. That night back at the cabin, his heart still pounded in his ears. Staring into the fire, he whispered softly to himself, "Too big for any man." And in that moment, he understood his long, lonely days were over. For something legend or nightmare had come to his very door. The wind wailed through the cracks, carrying a foreign echo, the splintering groan of wood, as if a great tree had just been pushed aside. His hand closed almost by instinct around the stock of the rifle by the door. The cold metal seeped into his skin, quickening his heartbeat. Slowly, he opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The wind struck hard, whipping the hem of his worn leather coat. Behind him, the oil lamp cast a golden circle of light. Before him, the forest lay in a black, heavy silence. And then he saw it, a massive shadow. It stood at the tree line, half shrouded in the white veil of mist. So tall its head seemed to reach the lower branches of the pines. Its body, broad and heavy, was covered in tangled gray-black hair. Its shoulders were wide as a wall. Each breath it released came out as a cloud of white, filling the frozen air, stretching the space around it with every inhale. The dog howled its cry, ripping through the night. The rancher lifted his rifle, the barrel trembling but steady, aimed straight ahead. He had never seen such a thing. The memory of footprints in the snow rushed back, and now here stood the one who had left them. That moment stretched long, like the span of a lifetime. Bigfoot, because now the rancher knew no other name for it, did not advance. It only stood unmoving like a silent guardian of the forest. Moonlight slipped across the mist, edging its frame in a silver glow. Its eyes glimmered faintly. They were not the eyes of a beast, savage and wild, but deep and unreadable. The rancher swallowed hard. The rifle stock pressed cold against his calloused palm. Half of him urged fire, now end this nightmare before it steps closer. But the other half, buried deeper within, whispered no. The wind stilled. Only the crackle of fire inside the cabin, the horse's frightened whinny, and his own pounding heart filled the silence. Slowly, the rancher lowered the rifle, though his gaze never left the creature. He saw it clearly. It did not snarl, did not bare teeth, did not move to strike. It only observed, as if it too were measuring him, and in that fleeting instant something stirred within the rancher. Not fear alone, but reverence, like standing before a force beyond human power, something mysterious, something worthy of respect. "Easy," he whispered hoarsely into the night. "I ain't here to fight." His voice drifted into the mist. Bigfoot shifted its breath heavier now. Then slowly it turned. Step by step it moved back into the dark trees. Branches shuddered, snow tumbled down with each massive motion. And then within seconds the figure was gone. The forest was silent once more, as if nothing had ever been there. The rancher stood frozen, the rifle limp in his hands. His breath came unsteady clouds rising in the frigid air. Only then did he realize he had not pulled the trigger, though he could have. Though the chance was plain. Deep down he knew had he fired he would have shattered something sacred, something that could never be mended. He stepped back inside, closing the door behind him, leaning against the wood. The fire still burned its warmth, wrapping the small cabin in a golden glow. Yet the rancher knew the world outside his door would never look the same. That night, sleep did not come easily. Each time he closed his eyes, the image returned, the towering silhouette in the mist, the moonlight outlining its broad shoulders in silver. The old dog lay close, growling now and then. The horse only settled when dawn was near, and the rancher whispered to the dark, almost to himself. Not every shadow means harm, and for the first time in many lonely years, he felt his heart awakened by the presence of a legend. Part 3. The Woman on the Bed. The storm raged through the night. Winds howled down the mountain passes, screaming like 100 lost souls. The small cabin shook under the weight of the gale. The rancher pulled his coat tighter, fed more wood into the fire, fighting to keep the house from being swallowed by the cold. The old dog pressed itself beneath the table, trembling hard. From the barn came frantic neighs, the horse pounding the ground so fiercely that the echoes carried into the cabin. It was a bad sign. The rancher knew. Animals always sensed what men could not. He seized his rifle and stood by the window. Outside, the darkness swirled snow whipping across the glass like a million needles. Then suddenly, through that white wall, a massive shadow appeared. The rancher's heart clenched. Bigfoot. No longer a distant figure in the mist. No longer a trail of footprints in the snow. It was coming straight toward the cabin, slow, steady against the storm itself. Each step thundered heavy, shaking the ground, spraying snow in great bursts. The rancher staggered back, rifle raised, his hand shaking. The dog let out a long, mournful howl, a sound that seemed to foretell fate itself. The wooden door shuddered under 3 heavy blows, but instead of breaking through, Bigfoot did something no one could have imagined. The door eased open. In the rush of icy wind, the giant figure bent low, and in its great fur-covered arms, it carried a woman. She lay motionless, her breath faint. Her hair was tangled, her face pale, but her lips still quivered with life. She was asleep or unconscious, the rancher could not tell. All he knew was that this legendary creature, with a gentleness beyond belief, stepped inside, lowered her, and placed her upon his rough wooden bed. Not a word, not a growl. Only the storm's roar outside and the deep silence within. The rancher stood frozen. The rifle in his hands felt unbearably heavy, yet he could not pull the trigger. Every instinct screamed at him to fear to act, but his heart was locked in wonder. The oil lamp's glow fell across the woman's face, and then he saw, upon her thin hand rested a silver ring, tarnished, yet gleaming faintly. Etched upon it was a name the rancher knew or thought he had heard once long ago in some half-forgotten memory. His chest tightened. His pulse pounded. The world itself seemed to spin around him. He took half a step forward, his hand trembling, reaching out, then withdrawing quickly as if afraid she might vanish at his touch. The room was thick with silence. Only the drum of his heart and the heavy breath of Bigfoot filled the air. The creature did nothing more. It only stood there bowing its head, its massive form filling the corner of the cabin. Its eyes were still not wild, not threatening, as though it had delivered something entrusted him with a burden and was waiting for him to understand. The rancher swallowed hard. Never had he felt a moment so terrifying yet so sacred. The presence of the legend itself had been enough to upend his life, but now to place a living human being into his care, it was beyond comprehension. The rifle slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the wooden floor. He did not pick it up. His eyes clung to the sleeping woman. His calloused hand pressed tight against his chest, where his heart hammered furiously. "Dear God," he whispered, his voice breaking. Bigfoot drew a deep breath, a sound like wind rushing through a canyon. Then it turned, stepping back toward the door. Without a glance behind it, passed into the storm, leaving the cabin's light, and the lone rancher stunned before the mystery left in his care. The door shook, then closed. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell. But inside, time seemed to stop. The rancher sat down beside the bed, his eyes fixed on the woman's face. She still slept, her breath steady. His rough hand reached toward the silver ring, touching it lightly. Faint memories surged of the town of an old story once told. But the greater question loomed: why had Bigfoot brought her here? Outside, the darkness swallowed every trace. But inside the cabin, a new light flickered to life, the light of the unknown and of a duty no one could have foreseen. Part 4: Truth and Choice. Inside the small cabin, the oil lamp flickered across the woman's face. She remained lost in a deep sleep, her breath faint but steady. The rancher sat beside the bed, his eyes fixed on each rise and fall of her chest. Every breath was proof to him that this was no illusion born of storm or loneliness. On the first day, he changed her damp cloth, pressed a bit of water to her lips. At times, she moaned softly in her sleep, whispering a name, the same name he remembered hearing back in town from a family gone missing only weeks before. Slowly, the memory of that silver ring and its engraving came together. This woman was not a stranger, but part of a sorrowful story whispered across the valley, and rumors travel faster than wind. When the storm broke, townsfolk came. They carried guns, torches, and suspicion. Beyond the wooden fence, voices rang out. "We heard you've got the missing girl. Tracks were found near here. Big ones. Must be that monster. Kill it. Anyone sheltering it is just as guilty." The rancher stood on the porch, hand gripping the rifle, his eyes cold as ice. He was not a man for words, but he knew this was the greatest trial of his life. To the townsfolk, Bigfoot was nothing but a beast. But to the rancher, the giant shadow had become something else entirely, a creature that had spared life, not taken it. A being that had placed a fragile woman into his care, instead of crushing her beneath its strength. It had vanished into the forest, yet the weight of that act remained heavy in his chest. The townsfolk would not wait. A band of hunters stormed into the woods, seeking proof. The rancher did not stop them, though his heart twisted. He knew, should they find Bigfoot, only blood would follow. And with it all, the mystery and strange mercy he had glimpsed would be trampled beneath hatred. That night, after the townsfolk withdrew, the rancher returned to the bedside. The woman stirred, caught between waking and dream. Her eyes opened faintly, her lips trembling as she whispered, Not a monster. It saved me." The words struck him like a bell. He sat in silence for hours, his fingers brushing the silver ring, feeling as though he held the truth in his hands, yet could not share it with a soul. And then, as if drawn by fate, Bigfoot returned. On a night thick with mist, the rancher heard the heavy tread outside the cabin. He stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, the oil lamp casting his shadow long across the snow. From the veil of fog, the giant emerged, tall, silent, its eyes glowing with something that was not malice. It stood still. The rancher lifted his rifle, heart hammering like a drum. Memories surged back, the town's fear, the great footprints in the snow, the night the creature had laid a woman gently on his bed, and her whisper, "It saved me." in that moment, the rancher knew he had to choose. If he pulled the trigger, he would be a hero in the town's eyes, the man who slew the monster. But if he lowered the gun, he would hold on to a truth no one else would ever believe, that some shadows bear no harm, and some legends carry more than fear. His breath came ragged, his finger tightened on the trigger, then trembled loose. The rancher slowly lowered the rifle. His eyes met the creature's, and for a span of eternity, two worlds touched. Then he whispered hoarse but steady, "Not every shadow means harm." The words drifted into the mist, and the rancher felt they had reached the being before him. Bigfoot bowed its head, a simple gesture heavy with recognition. Then it turned, vanishing into the night, leaving the rancher trembling and strangely unburdened, as though he had crossed an unseen threshold. Inside the cabin, the woman slept, her hand curled tight around the silver ring. Outside, the forest was quiet once more, and within the rancher's heart, a new truth took root, that sometimes what we call a monster is not an ending, but a bridge that carries us back to one another. Part 5. Bigfoot fades into the mist. That night, the forest lay buried in thick fog. A full moon hung high in the silver-gray sky, breaking through scattered clouds, casting cold streaks of light across the snow. The rancher's cabin glowed like the lone flame of a lantern in the endless sea of night. The woman still slept soundly on the wooden bed, her face no longer so pale. The rancher sat beside her, listening in silence to her steady breath. In his hand was the silver ring, the token Bigfoot had left along with her. He turned it slowly in his palm, feeling as though he was turning the wheel of his own fate. Then came a sound outside, the heavy crunch of snow, a deep, slow breath. The rancher rose at once. The rifle hung by the wall, but he did not reach for it. Instead, he opened the door and stepped onto the porch. And there, in the pale mist, Bigfoot appeared once more. It stood still, broad shoulders veiled in fog, its breath spilling clouds of white into the cold night. The moonlight edged its great form, making it look less like flesh and bone, and more like part of the mountain itself. Its eyes glimmered with a calm that carried no menace, only a quiet farewell. The rancher clenched the ring in his hand and took one step closer. For a final time, two worlds met, a lonely man and the legend of the deep woods. No words, no sudden moves. Bigfoot bowed its head. A simple gesture, yet heavy with meaning. A farewell, perhaps even a trust. The rancher swallowed, his chest-tight veins rising along his hand as he gripped the ring. Overcome, he whispered, voice hoarse but warm, "Some legends heal." His words dissolved into the fog, yet he knew they would follow the creature into the forest. Bigfoot stepped back. Each movement was slow, heavy, but not frightening. With every step, the mist swallowed more of its towering shape, until at last only the faint glow of its eyes remained, and then nothing. Silence returned to the woods as if nothing had ever passed. The rancher stood still for a long time, staring into the emptiness where the creature had vanished. He heard the whisper of wind through the pines, the old dog's sigh inside the cabin, and the steady slowing of his own heartbeat. Not fear now, but a deep stillness like the hush that follows a prayer. He turned back inside. The woman slept peacefully. The rancher sat down beside her, placing the ring gently back into her hand. In his eyes glimmered a tenderness he had forgotten he still carried. The night passed in quiet. The moon rose higher, then drifted down, making way for dawn, the first bright morning after the storm. Sunlight broke across the cabin, chasing away the fog shining on the woman's face and the deep lines of the rancher's weathered eyes. In that moment, he knew his life had changed forever. Bigfoot had not only left a human life in his care, it had left him with a faith. A belief that even in darkness, some legends choose to bring healing instead of fear. The rancher smiled softly, the first smile in many years. A small smile, but enough to warm the room. The storm was over. The western sky shifted from gray to pale gold sunlight filtering through pine boughs, still dripping with mist. The cabin stood like a glowing ember in the snowy wilderness. From its chimney, white smoke curled upward, fading into the morning wind. Inside, the rancher sat quietly at the table, a tin cup of steaming coffee in his hands. He felt the heat spread into his skin, deeper still into the cold places of his heart. The smell of strong coffee and pinewood smoke carried memories of long ago, of family, of warmth, of a home once lost. On the bed, the woman stirred. Her lashes fluttered, then opened to the morning light. She looked around, confused at first, then calmed when her eyes found the rancher by the fire. That gaze carried no words, but held a question and a deep gratitude. The rancher nodded quietly, saying nothing. He poured another cup, setting it gently before her. The motion was clumsy but sincere, and with that another smile touched his face, small but brighter than the sunrise outside. Neither spoke of Bigfoot. Neither tried to explain why the creature had brought her there. The rancher knew some truths do not need answers. Just as the forest keeps its secrets, some mysteries are meant only to be carried. What mattered was simple: she lived, and he had found a reason to believe life could be different again. He sat there listening to her breathing, to the crackle of firewood, to the gentler wind outside. And in his heart, he whispered once more, "Not every shadow means harm. Some legends heal." And he believed from that day on, his road would no longer stretch out in loneliness alone. In the Wild West, between legend and fear, kindness is the bridge between mankind and the unknown. If this story touched your heart, leave a thought in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next tale where legend, humanity, and compassion meet. And if you find comfort in these words, return each evening to sit with us by the western fire and listen to the stories that never fade.